Awesome, guys. First and foremost, thank you so much for joining us for Strategic Astrology for the month of July. This session is going to be a very interesting one because July has arguably the most important astrology of the year inside of it. If you're someone who has been with me since I started with Awkwardly Zen, one of my kickoff events was the astrology of 2026 as a year in total. And in that, we had already discussed a little bit about what July is going to bring us. I'm excited to go over it today now that we have more context. And with that, let's share the screen. So in this class, we're going to cover an introduction to transits and aspects in astrology. So we'll cover a few of the building blocks of astrology, and hopefully that'll give us a better idea of what we're dealing with for the second half of class. The meat of today's class is going to be the Barbault basket, which, if you are not familiar with, is the planetary alignment that is happening over the course of July that we're already in, but it crystallizes and takes full force in July. We always got to front load with a few reminders. In astrology, we have the axiom as above, so below. The collective and the individual are mirrors of each other. What's going on in the sky is a reflection of what's happening on Earth, and what's happening on Earth is a reflection of what's going on in the sky. So we can look on Earth to understand what's happening in astrology and vice versa. Every single transit and every single astrological event has positive and negative potentials, and every single one of them can be leveraged strategically. Our job as astrologer is to look at world events to find patterns, not to predict doom. And our job is to stay as objective as possible. What's good for me might be bad for someone else and vice versa. So understanding that we're looking at the quality of an experience is really important. The intensity of any transit depends on how it touches your own birth chart. So there are things we're going to talk about in this class, and today's class might feel a little intense because we're talking about some larger themes. That doesn't mean that everything is going to fall apart on you, nor does it mean that we're doomed. Sometimes the events that go on to the collective, of course, impact each of us, but the intensity of that impact depends on your own chart, your own culture, your own lived experience, your location, etc. And so lastly, foresight is meant to steer your decisions consciously, so try not to let it turn into anxiety. With astrology, oftentimes we are future casting or we are predicting things that might happen. And if you go on social media, every astrologer is going to tell you how next Monday is going to change your life. And certainly astrological events can impact our lives. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here doing this. But at the same time, we need to take everything with a little bit of maturity and a little bit of a grain of salt. So this is my biggest disclaimer of them all. Today, we are looking at world news events past and present. So if you are someone who gets anxious about news headlines, the second half of this class might not be for you. I just want to put that out there. In order to understand July's astrology, sometimes we have to look at what's going on in the world around us. Just because we talk about these events does not mean that any of us agree with them or support them. The job of an astrologer is to look to the past, see what happened during the past, and apply the principles to the future. So let's dive right into the learning part of today's class, which is Astrology 102, Aspects and Transits. So in order to understand how we're approaching today, aspects and transits are two parts of the astrology that we really need to be clear about, and we need to get some baseline definitions around. So a transit is an event where the planets make angles with each other. Aspects are the type of angles that they're making. And understanding transits and aspects are one of the biggest part of astrology. An aspect is a connection between two planetary points. Short story, they're angles, which means if we are dividing up the sky into a circle, when something connects at 0 degrees, meaning they're conjunct with each other, they're hand in hand. If things are 180 degrees away from each other, they are considered in opposition to each other. Every single aspect or major aspect has a degree that creates geometric symmetry in a birth chart. So you can see here, the geometric shape of a conjunction is just the point itself. An opposition creates a line. Trines create a 120 degree or a triangle in the chart. Squares create a square, and a sextile creates a six-pointed star. So when we're looking at charts, we look at how these planets connect to each other by angle in order to determine how they're going to hang out with each other, how they're going to agree with each other, what's their relationship. Are they getting along or are they arguing? That's what these angles represent in a chart. To help contextualize that, here is a visual of the geometric symmetry and some of the sacred geometry of astrology. A conjunction, for example, is a 0-degree aspect. So if we look in my personal chart, you can see here Uranus sits at 18 degrees and Neptune also sits at 18 degrees. So those two planets are perfectly conjunct, which means it's like coffee and cream. Once you put coffee and creamer together, there's no way of separating them. So those two planets in my chart hold hands and they're never separated. Where one goes, the other follows, and their themes are blended together. A conjunction is going to be a really potent mix of the energies. The slower planet applies its energy to the faster moving planet. So you can see another conjunction here in my chart. It's not a perfect 0-degree conjunction, but Jupiter sits at 17 degrees in my chart and Mars sits at 19. So since Jupiter is a slower moving planet, it applies its energy to Mars. So Mars gets the expansive qualities of Jupiter in that case. Similarly, looking at an opposition, oppositions are 180-degree aspects, which means they form on opposite sides of the pie. So in this case, again, we have that Uranus and Neptune at 18 degrees, but sitting on the opposite side, we've got the moon in the sister sign of Cancer, also at 18 degrees. You can think of an opposition kind of like a tug of war. Whenever planets are opposite of each other in the sky, it's a battle of which planet's needs are going to be met. And there are other things in astrology you can do to see who's going to quote unquote win. But each of these planets are going to need their moment or their time to be celebrated and to be seen. And they're going to pull at each other for that attention. A trine, that 120-degree aspect, is when you have planets that are in the same element as each other. So when we look at my chart, you can see that I have the Sun at Virgo at 18 degrees. Uranus and Neptune are sitting at 18 degrees of Capricorn. So whenever you have a trine, we consider that aspect a harmonious flow, making it really easy for each planet involved to play off of each other. You guys can think of the elements as almost a mode of your psyche. So the earth signs represent a need for security and a need for the practical, tangible parts of our life to be taken care of. So both Virgo and Capricorn as earth signs want to take care of the tangible, practical things, and they have different roles to play in how they do it. So when you have a trine connecting two earth sign planets, that is going to show us that they're able to support each other in getting whatever that element wants to get done. So trines oftentimes are going to be the easiest aspects. Sometimes they're natural gifting. Sometimes you can forget that they're there. It's like, oh yeah, I have that gifting, but it just comes naturally to me, so I don't really think about it. That's a trine relationship. There is an easy flow that doesn't have a push against it. Things just line up for it. Squares, on the other hand, are aspects of friction. They form a 90-degree angle, and a square angle is kind of like friction that sharpens a sword. It is where two different elements are trying to pull our lives in different directions, but both of them are trying to do a similar sort of directional thing. Cancer and Libra are both cardinal signs, which means they start seasons, which means they both want to take initiative, but they want to do it in different ways. Cancer is the initiative of a tribe or community, so think of a matriarch, versus Libra is initiative at the negotiating table. So you have a nurturing type of initiative that's trying to be taken in the square shown here versus a diplomatic initiative that's trying to be taken. So they compete with how they want to lead, but they're both simultaneously trying to move us forward. So when we have a square, it is usually an aspect that is going to make us sharper. It's going to make us stronger, but they do compete for attention in the chart, and that can mean sometimes we have to learn how to balance these two different parts of ourselves. And lastly, the sextile is a 60-degree angle, and that is a supportive aspect that can be utilized through effort. So when you have planets 60 degrees apart from each other, which every sign is 30 degrees, so that's just 2 signs away. Like, for example, here we have the moon at 18 degrees of Cancer and the sun at 18 degrees of Virgo. Well, Virgo can be quite meticulous and picky. Cancer brings a sensitive edge to that. So in my chart, for example, if I remember to lean on my sensitivity, to lean on that intuitive Cancer moon, it can support the direction that Virgo wants to go. Simultaneously, Cancer can sometimes be too emotionally scattered to be able to make clear decisions. So a Virgo sun can support that Cancer in being able to organize, label those feelings, and to understand the different parts that make up the whole in order to make a decision easier. So the sextiles have to be utilized with conscious effort, which means if you have sextiles in your chart, there's a lot that you can probably accomplish if you were to apply your energy in that direction. So those are the primary aspects, and in astrology, we call them the major aspects, which means they are the only aspects that create a defined shape in the chart. A transit is just the exact moment that those aspects are happening. Sometimes a transit is made in a sky, not in our natal charts or birth charts, and that would be considered a collective transit. For example, a full moon happens every single month. So every full moon would be a transit, but it's also a collective transit. It becomes a personal transit to you if it touches the planets in your birth chart by one of those angles. Then we know that that full moon is going to be a little bit more significant. At the same time that I was born, this represents a chart of me getting born, maybe other people who were born at the same time as me. Maybe someone passed away around that same time. Maybe something was going on in the news, and maybe someone got married. All of these things are happening around the globe, and each of those moments, if they happen at the same time, would share the same birth chart. All your birth chart is a snapshot of the sky at the time you were born. So any news events that happened around this period would also share the same qualities, but in their own way. And that's why we talk about what's above is also below, and what's below is of the above, because you can see these mirrors between what's happening in the world around us and what's going on in your life right now. So our job is to look at the connections and to get creative with how they're applied, which means by studying world events through astrology, I should, in theory, be able to understand a birth chart better. Learning the time that a successful project was launched can also be a great time to plan a wedding. And it's by watching these patterns play out over time that your astrological practice is refined and made perfect. As an example, the chart for this event, 5 p.m. Mountain Time, June 26, had a Scorpio rising on it. It had the moon in the second house. It had Jupiter and Mercury going conjunct in the ninth house, which is really fun. The ninth house rules education. So the fact that we're taking a class is a great marker for Jupiter, Mercury in the ninth house. And you can see how reading this chart for this class would be very different than reading this as a birth chart for an individual. Yet still, we have all of the aspects and transits that are happening simultaneously in the sky that make up a network or a quality of not just this event, but anything that happens around this time. Example 2 is we can look at this chart on its own, or we can say, well, this is Moses' event, so we should probably look at Moses' birth chart to see how this interacts with Moses' chart. Is this a significant moment for Moses or not? And when we look at my chart, we layer on, here's my birth chart on the inside, and astrologers layer the current sky on the outside. So then we compare. Very interesting. Moses is going through his Venus return. There's some sort of extra quality of this ninth house teaching moment. The midheaven is lined up, which means that there is synastry in it being a career moment for him. And the moon is on the ascendant, meaning this is the Moses show, as I actively show my own birth chart as examples. So you can see here, we can look for all of these different connections and then also the angles at which they're lining up. As we saw, I have a lot of 18-degree placements. So if something in the sky right now is getting close to 18 degrees, then that would be significant for me to look at and to see what sort of angles are being made to my chart. So astrology is a lot. That's why it is not for someone who necessarily wants quick hits or someone who is not good at all of the memorization, but it is well worth it when you're able to break down the qualities of experiences over time. We got a question here from Amanda. How close do the degrees need to be considered conjunct? More or less, what is the range to look for? And Amanda, my answer to that question would be it really depends on what we're talking about. So if this was a birth chart and we know that someone's going to live multiple years, then they can have more room apart. So I would look at a conjunction by about 8 degrees in terms of a birth chart, which means those planets are right there, but they're going to be about 8 degrees apart. That's what we call a wide orb or a long degree range apart from each other. But they're still going to be there long enough that they learn each other and get to know each other. Some astrologers use by sign conjunctions. So if you have 2 planets in the same sign in a birth chart, they're conjunct no matter how far apart. When we're looking at things like events, for example, though, the closer we get, the better, because the planets ideally are the things that trigger events. So the closer that something is in aspect to each other, the more we can blame that planet for it. So if planets are 1 degree apart, for example, that's a really good instance of like, wow, that's a really strong conjunction. And the further we get away from that 0 to 1 degrees, the less immediate impact there is. Valerie says, I was just wondering about the relationship of an event to a person, and then you answered it. Yes, yes, yes. There's layers upon layers upon layers of astrological correlation, because then we could also take this same event chart and apply it to each of you to see if it's significant to you or to help us understand your life right now. So there's no end to it, and that's why astrology can sometimes be slippery. You can have all of the right answers, but not look at the right chart and miss something that could be significant. So to summarize, the collective astrology isn't always going to impact you directly, but it is going to impact someone. That's a really strong point to make for today's class, and also important to know whenever you have so many things going on in astrology at once. We talked about how sometimes astrology can be redundant if you're just trusting your intuition. If you're someone who knows what you're feeling in the moment, if you're someone who knows how not to trick themselves, if you know how your emotions work and how to regulate them, a well-informed intuition is going to do everything that astrology already does. Remember, we inform the astrology here, which means that we can choose and activate pathways that we want to see. There are positive and negative potentials of every single thing. And just because we focus on big world events, let me tell you something, no major world event has ever been rainbows and sunshine for everyone. It is really good for parts of the collective and then sometimes not good for other parts of the collective. So realistically, when we're determining importance in your chart specifically, it's going to matter if some of the planets are making aspects to your birth chart. If there are really tight aspects to your birth chart, then we would expect those moments to be significant. And specifically, that means your planets are the key. Understanding the degrees of your planets, especially your personal planets, which is Sun through Mars, are going to give you really good indicators of the type of moments in your life that are going to be the most impactful. And then it's the wacky world of madness after that, because while a transit may not impact me, it could impact my husband, and in that way, it impacts me. The butterfly effect is a really good way of looking at astrology sometimes, where individual moments or events, individual personal decisions impact the collective, and in tangent, the collective circumstances impact the individual. So all that said, that is our Transits 102 class, and that's really going to help us prioritize and understand the energy and what we're talking about today. Leading into July, this is the chart cast 12 a.m. July 1st. As of July 1st, we are going to be in a Mercury retrograde. Mercury retrograde starts on the 29th I always like to think of that as throwing a bunch of things against the wall and seeing what sticks. It's happening in the sign of Cancer, and Mercury is going retrograde at the same time as a Capricorn full moon. Otherwise, we have a few other events that are taking place. Venus is sitting in Leo, which rewards and praises peacocking, exaggerated sense of self, showing up like a campfire, being warm enough that people come to you, not being afraid to let your true colors show. We have Saturn in Aries. Saturn in Aries teaches you the consequences of moving too quickly. We also have Mars freshly into Gemini in July, which is very quick moving. Mars in Gemini is kind of like a Swiss Army knife. You got to pull out all of your different tools. And it's also communication warfare. You can see here we've got Mars and Uranus linking up in Gemini, and that actually goes exact on July 4th. That is the first activation of the Barbault basket that we're talking about today. But Mars and Uranus conjunct and being this close together in July sometimes can represent unexpected, quick communication. It can represent unforeseen circumstances. Interestingly enough, Mars and Uranus together is actually part of the United States chart. And during Uranus Mars activations, we usually see some interesting events play out with the United States. Pro tip, following the sun. If you're like, Moses, I'm not doing all of this, I don't care about these aspects, just tell me what to do, or Moses, this is too much and too complicated, that is a-okay. Following the sun through your chart is one of the easiest and best ways to make sure that you are looking at every area of your life in a dynamic and interesting way. So right now the sun is in Cancer and it'll shift to Leo on July 22nd. So knowing your rising sign, which is based on your birth time, and following the sun is one of the simplest ways to start working with astrology practically. And with that said, here is a little chart for you. So if you are, for example, an Aries rising, Cancer season focuses on your fourth house, which represents home, family, roots, and foundation. And by Leo season, it will move into the fifth house, which rules over creativity, romance, and pleasure. So you can find your rising sign in the column and see where the sun is currently and towards the tail end of the month where it's going to be. And then you can actively and consciously choose to work with those areas of your life. That is aligning yourself with solar energy in one sense of it. And it's also making sure that by the end of a year, your whole life has been looked at in a 360-degree way. I always say with this, you don't even have to believe in astrology to use this. If I know at one point in the year I'm going to be focusing on my money, income, and self-worth, and others, I'm going to be focusing on my rest and inner work and everything in between, this is a really great way to make sure that I am approaching my life in a holistic direction. All right, guys, and now let's get into the meat of the month, which is the Barbault basket. The reason we call it the Barbault basket is there was a 20th century astrologer who first caught that this transit was taking place. And the reason why it's important is we've really only seen it once or twice in human history. Don't get me wrong, there's a ton of things in astrology that we've only seen once or twice in human history. And it's very hard to find exact matches because there's always some sort of different factor going on in the sky than there was last time around. But the last time we had a basket like this, which is Pluto at 4 degrees, Neptune sitting at 4 degrees, Uranus sitting at 4 degrees, and I missed the mark a little here in my screenshot, but Jupiter will be at 4 degrees, like a day or two after whenever I screenshotted this. It's like July 19th is the exact date of that. That basket is a very rare alignment where all of the motivations of the outer planets are connected and united with each other, which means Jupiter is the fastest moving planet here. So when Jupiter clicks into place, all three of these outer planets are simultaneously impacting and affecting it. And similarly, if you're someone who has 4-degree placements in your birth chart, there's probably some part of your chart that's going to be hit or impacted by this configuration. As we discussed, trines are harmonious flows. Sextiles are supportive aspects that require ignition in some kind of way. Oppositions are a pull or a fight for balance. I had a question come through. What are the 4 planets? We've got Jupiter in Leo, Uranus in Gemini, Neptune in Aries, and we've got Pluto in Aquarius. those 4 planets are making the Barbault basket. So what we're going to do today is a little bit similar to what we did at the beginning of the year, where we'll specifically look at Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto to understand what they do, what historically happened around those time periods, the last time they were in their respective positions. And we will use those individual cases to get a better understanding of the current container that we're in a global context. And then towards the end, we are going to do some personal application as well. So if you're like, Moses, I don't care about the world, what's going on with me, just stick around towards the end. It'll make a lot more sense after we discuss what's going on in the collective. Okay, outer planets don't set up events. Uranus touching Pluto doesn't necessarily cause or trigger an event to happen. They're making these close aspects to each other, and they take a long time to move. Pluto stays for a sign in about 20 years, which means it has 20 years to move between the degrees of the zodiac, which means that we've been in this container of them already. The difference is when they're at the exact degree, when a faster moving planet crosses over that point, it's going to trigger a more significant event because instead of hitting one outer planet at a time, it's hitting all of them at once. So there's a lot of events connected to this thing, and that's why we're looking at it. Again, my last disclaimer before we really get into it, we're just putting a name to the things that are already happening. So don't freak out. An astrologer is always going to tell you that something's significant because it's significant to someone. Uranus in Gemini rules over information and technology. Neptune in Aries rules over ideals and the borders that try to contain them. Pluto in Aquarius rules over power and the way that it changes hands. So we're going to talk about these 3 outer planets, actually starting in reverse with Pluto. And Pluto in Aquarius is power changing hands. Raise your hand digitally or on camera if you are a tarot person. If you're familiar with the tarot, let me know. I see Cheryl, Linnea, awesome. Terry, Maz, awesome. Anastasia, I'm so glad I added tarot to this, you guys. Pluto's represented from the Judgment card, which I see as the card of Rapture, which is about the dead coming back to life again and a reunification of our purpose. So Pluto represents that underworld. You can see all of these folks were in coffins and they're being awoken by purpose from God. So Pluto can sometimes be associated with the element of fire in that it is Phoenix energy. Pluto can also be associated with the below categories like power and authority, fire's cleansing and purifying quality. Pluto is associated with finance, debt, and wealth, nuclear power, mining and underground resources, taking that theme of what's below in the underworld quite literally. And it also rules over things like psychology, secrets, and investigations. Now, the other cards, the star, is the energy of Aquarius. You can see the clear example of the water bearer here being represented in the star, but you also have this idea of the star coming after the tower. Whenever old structures no longer work, the star imagines a brighter future for how things can be and reconnects with the basics. So that Aquarian energy can sometimes represent the building of a utopia. And in that idea of trying to build a better world, we learned that one person's heaven can very quickly become another person's hell. So that star quality or that Aquarian quality often represents power to the people and a broader fight for ideals. The specific decan or 10-degree sliver of Aquarius that Pluto is in right now can be represented by the 5 of Swords. And it shows us very clearly the type of people who try to get away with shit and how smugly and confidently they can try to get away with it. So when you combine these 3 planetary energies through the tarot, you can see it through the 5 of Swords, leadership and authority figures trying to get away with things and the people having a response to it. On this card, we always see these 2 as the losers or giving up in some sort of way. Sometimes it's more about going back to the drawing board and seeing what needs to change. But one thing's clear is that whenever Pluto is in Aquarius, power changes hands. And there's a very clear link in history whenever Pluto has been in Aquarius previously. So the last time around was 1778 to 1798, which most notoriously was the French and American Revolution. So you have the French and American Revolution, but you also have things like 1776, Adam Smith creates the founding text of modern capitalism, the Haitian Revolution in 1791. 1793, the King of France is executed by guillotine. I'm not going to say fingers crossed, but a boy can hope. And across the 1780s and 1790s, we have factories and power looms beginning, which is the start of the Industrial Revolution. So, patterns that we're seeing historically, power changing hands, machines starting to reshape labor, and the public revolting to abuses of power. Next outer planet up on the roster is Neptune. Neptune is represented by the Hanged Man. Neptune represents the dissolution of boundaries and a liminal space where we have to understand the murkiness of all things. The Hanged Man hangs himself upside down in order to experience the world in a different way. And similarly, Neptune shows us how easy it is to dissolve the things that we once thought were permanent. That is Neptune's function overall, is dissolution, and Neptune also rules over collective belief. So, for example, Neptune rules over the idea of money. What does that mean? You have other planets that rule money. So Venus has a hand in ruling over money. Jupiter, to some extent, has a hand in ruling over money. So why does Neptune rule over money as well, and in what way? Neptune rules over money because we collectively have agreed that money is real, and that's what Neptune represents. Similarly, Neptune rules over things like national borders because the border itself isn't a real thing. We've just collectively agreed that border exists. And you also have any other kind of liminal space ruled over by Neptune. Of course, Neptune, god of the sea, rules over water in the sea, but also oil. You have Neptune ruling over things like ideals and mass movements that gather around them. So Neptune representing the ideals of the people. So Aries energy is represented by the Emperor. The Emperor is a reminder of the individual will, that overall, the Emperor calls the shots. And when we pull the Emperor in tarot, it's usually a reminder that you're the one who has to make the decision. Stop asking the cards for it. What's in your spirit? What do you want to create? And how are you going to control it? The Emperor can take advice from other people, but ultimately it is his decision. Aries energy is the I am in the Bible, which is that energy of I am, I create, I have the potential to be anything that I can be, but my passion, motivation, and my fire is pointing me in this direction. The specific part of the zodiac that Neptune is running through is the Two of Wands. The wands, 2 through 4, represent a king's conquest. So in the 2, the king is plotting to take over a foreign empire. And that is coming from the historical association. A king does not plan his conquest during the winter. During the winter, it's too cold. His troops can be lost. There's going to be a lack of food. And there's going to be a shortcoming if we try to send all these people to conquer now. So what are we going to do? We're going to wait for spring. And by waiting for spring, it brings the warmth, the potential for food that then allows the king to make his conquest. And that's the Two of Wands energy, is that first break of spring. It's the seed cracking through soil and something new emerging. The emperor understands that other people are going to be pissed off when he gets what he wants. So Neptune in Aries, in that way, can be represented by the ideals that are worth fighting for. In Aries, Neptune turns belief into something that people will go to war over, for better or worse. Historically, Neptune in Aries the last time around was 1861 through 1875. During that time, we had the American Civil War, which was a war over collective belief. We had Italy unifying into a single kingdom. We had the Emancipation Proclamation. We had the US abolishing slavery. Karl Marx giving labor a new ideology. Marxism coming on the rise. 1869, we had the Suez Canal opening. And we also have 1871 Germany unifying into an empire. Uranus in Gemini is the last outer planet of this basket and of this greater mix. Uranus is represented by the Fool. The Fool is a quite interesting energy when you're using astrological tarot, folks. The idea is everything behind him is disintegrating. The Fool has no choice but to move forward because everything behind him is changing. So he's forced into the journey. He doesn't even know what he's getting himself into. He just sees and responds to the changes as they come. So there is definitely beginner's luck, but there's also the lightning strike of change. And to get really nerdy into it, many of the folks who began and created the tarot we know and love today understood the Fool to represent Dionysus, the Greek god of wine. But wherever Dionysus went, things were liberated and changed. Dionysus represented a breakdown of structure and order and a liberation of something different. Whatever was trapped beneath human desire through structure was broken down and set free. Gemini itself, represented by the Lover's card, which is about the duality of choice. It is also about understanding the validity of all choices in all directions, as well as the need to make a decision or a point where we're having to choose what type of person we are going to be. So the specific sliver that they're going through is going to be the Eight of Swords. And that Eight of Swords energy, when you combine all of these astrological energies together, is the Lord of Interference, as they call it. It's kind of like needing to make a choice, but circumstances keep changing every time you turn around. So there is no way to logic your way through the choices with the Eight of Swords. The only path forward is to follow the water. Uranus, in general, is going to rule over things like technology, automation, and invention. Uranus also rules over communication and media, especially in Gemini. Aviation and transport, new technologies is a really good indicator for Uranus. Liberation, reform, and unexpected freedoms in Gemini, it rebuilds the way that information travels and changes who gets to control it. Last time around was 1941 to 1949, the tail end of the Civil War. So we had things like code breakers at Bletchley Park, cracking the Enigma cipher. We had D-Day, which was the largest coordinated communications operation in history. We had the GI Bill, which sent 8 million veterans to college. 1945, the Manhattan Project, bringing nuclear power to the forefront. ENIAC, which was the first general purpose electric computer. The transistor was invented and the Cold War began. Churchill gave his Iron Curtain speech during Uranus and Gemini as well, which talk about dividing powers and that idea of Gemini being having to make a choice or choose who you are. Interesting that the divide of East and West was sort of built around that moment. And we also have things like television reaching mass adoption. The idea here is when Uranus is in Taurus, new shit gets made. When Uranus enters Gemini, it's distributed to everyone. So AI was developed Uranus and Taurus, for example. AI is now being implemented and quickened, and the pace is being rapidly accelerated with Uranus and Gemini. Oftentimes, you can see things like new technology was made for war purposes during Uranus and Taurus as well. And then Uranus and Gemini is kind of when those war purpose technologies enter the private sector after a war. Okay, so all of that said, storyline of the outer planets. We went through what's happening in the past. And I'm here to tell you that there are some events that are already linked to the things that we're probably going to experience in July and onward. So the best way to know how your planets work in astrology, you can Google what your sun sign means. You can Google what any of your planets mean. But if you're watching when an aspect happens, which means when a current sky planet interacts with your chart, that is the most telling example of how that planet moves. That's where we actually put the astrological practice into place. And that's when we learn, actually, my Venus isn't about love at all. It's about my mommy issues. That depends on your chart, folks. But storyline of the outer planets, we've been getting a peek into what the outer planets are doing over the past couple of months. So with that being said, and your grain of salt digested, let's get into some of the world events right now. The overall storyline is that there is obviously a fight for control that's happening on a global scale. All of these topics are way more connected with each other than we might think they are. Energy and AI. AI is moving into military and government. We know that this is the case because there's been backlash against companies that won't let them use it for autonomous killing machines, for example. That AI usage drives energy demand through the roof. And at the same time, we're fighting a war over another form of energy, oil. That's happening while these power skills are tipping and revelations about our leaders and public figures are coming into the light. Epstein and Hidden Agendas, Project 2025. We know that all of these sort of scandals are being realized on a collective scale like they haven't before, which if we talk about Pluto and Aquarius, there's that collective energy and what's hidden beneath the surface bubbling up and being seen in a new light and power back to the people. With the potential AI bubble pop and economic hardship, as well as growing strain on a global economy, conversations around immigration and what federal government is responsible for and who they're responsible for become a hinging factor on the stability of state infrastructure. Are our state infrastructures ready for these people? Do we want this or that type of person? And all of these conversations are being had. This comes as a conservative movement is starting that seeks to unify culture on a countrywide level. And then this growing public resentment and backlash is ensuing at the same time due to clear abuses of power, as well as a growing lack of concern for the working class. So you have this parallel of the rich getting guillotined during the French Revolution sort of coming back around. You've got public resentment because everyone's waking up to this idea that your leaders are full of shit. You've got, at the same time, those leaders trying to maintain control and retain their status as a superpower. Because, in my opinion, the powers that be are fighting for control with a full understanding that whoever emerges victorious during this period in history will most likely become a dominant global power in the next chapter. So there's a lot riding on this point of history. Whoever has the most advanced AI has the ability to cause significant damage to countries that are less established in their AI ecosystem. And at the same time, all of these different global power and energy crises that we're experiencing as a collective sort of play into this clusterfuck of an event, for lack of better words. First and foremost, storyline one, and the thing that's most linked to outer planet activations is Iran war and nuclear diplomacy. So Neptune and Aries here, Neptune ruling over oil and borders. Some of the headlines that happen, Mars goes conjunct with Pluto, and we have South Africa facing US attacks. Sun goes conjunct with Neptune, and residents in southern Israel are shaken after direct strikes. But you can see here, I don't want to just list these off because there's a lot of events down the next couple of slides. When you're seeing aspects to the outer planets, we know that what's happening is probably significant and is probably a good clue for what might happen the next time that an outer planet gets hit. So pattern that we're seeing come up is a conflict that resolves on paper and reopens in practice, with perhaps more religious implications involved in this war than originally thought. There is a clear divide here, not just across global powers, but also the religions that are represented by these global powers. So it bears the question of what does this war against Islam have to do with this as well? And what is the obsession with the Middle East that has been going on, especially in context of Israel too? So we've seen this shake out in a few different storylines: Russia, Ukraine, US, Venezuela, Cuba, Taiwan, and so much more, with Neptune ruling over those borders. Storyline 2, immigration enforcement, seems to be a very significant thing that is linked to these outer planet events. It's a Pluto and Aquarius storyline. You can see here almost every single event related to immigration policies had Pluto as a part of them. So that idea of Pluto and Aquarius representing the desire to build a utopia means that we're having these deeper conversations of who belongs and whether or not the infrastructure supports it. Interestingly enough, we have this idea of the American Revolution last time with Pluto and Aquarius, which was quite literally colonizers moving into a place that nobody invited them to and them staking their ground into it. So now you have these moments where this conversation around illegal immigration is coming up, and it begs the question, is it any different than what we did in 1773? Storyline 3 that I'm seeing play out is tech and AI. So this is the dominant Uranus in Gemini storyline. And as AI continues to lead into all of these different parts of the corporate sector, we're also getting more clarity around how it's being used in government and military. So AI and job headlines have sort of been coming up over this point. More recently, in May, we saw a lot of commencement speeches talking about AI and the public backlash to all of it. We had a few different events happening, like SpaceX, a non-AI program, yet still SpaceX is being grown so that data centers can be made in space. And that's one of their primary missions, is to take some of the strain off of the world and our environment and into space. We talked a little bit already about the 1940s and what happened. There are some crystal clear parallels there. Honorable mentions, some of the other storylines that aren't consistently there but are part of the current zeitgeist. Faith and clergy. It's been very interesting to see how Catholicism has been on the rise, how the Catholic Church has been responding to the backlash of AI and fighting and advocating for humanity in some kind of way. We are also seeing new ideologies coming into the light. We've had China, Taiwan, and trade as one part of it. China and Taiwan, very, very similar to US and Cuba or US and Venezuela. Who is going to control that territory? And this conversation of technology being linked to Taiwan and their ability to make the chips is a really big pressure point. Pluto and Aquarius kind of ruling over that. But again, all of these outer planets are connected and supporting each other. So all of these things are happening at once and they bleed into each other's themes. Oil sanction and energy is going to be part 3 of that. Oil is the real currency of the conflict right now. So it's going to be very interesting to see. And we've had a lot of headlines connected to the outer planets surrounding the energy crisis that we're currently facing. And lastly, Epstein. It's definitely not being talked about as much, but new revelations about this are being made every single day. And it's going to be interesting to see what, if anything, arises in July in regards to the Epstein conversation, in regards to who keeps power, in regards to who gets revolted on, and in regards to who sort of takes the throne, so to speak. So that was a lot. I'm going to take a sip of water. We can all take a deep breath. That is a lot to talk about in a matter of an hour. But as you guys can see, the astrology is astrologying. So now that we've looked at some of those global implications, what's in it for us? How can we take advantage of this time and use the astrology to our advantage? Because if you don't know, folks, I always say it, but I am an opportunist. Out of any conflict, there's a winner, and why can't it be us? So Pluto in Aquarius is asking, on a personal level, what power dynamics are shifting in your life right now? How are you owning your power? Who are you giving your power away to? Who are you allowing to represent you? And are they doing what they said they would, or are they revealing their intentions in a different way? What are you still controlling out of fear? And how can you release that fear? Sometimes with Pluto, there's this intensity that surrounds it that desires for the way things were to continue on the same course. And that's why we get this backlash of power dynamics with Pluto. What are we powerless to? How is our perspective so much better when we focus on the things that are truly controllable instead of worrying about the things that we can't? And who is benefiting from my outrage? A news article makes us frustrated and all of a sudden we're up in arms. Who published the news article? What's their intent? What's their goal? It can be the right cause for the wrong reason. And sometimes it's important to critically assess whether we are just going to blindly trust even a leader who claims to be in our best interest, even if we've agreed with them in the past. Politics and ideologies aside, you can look at this from a stance of work. You can have the best boss in the world, but if it came down to your job or their job, what are they going to choose? It's a very rare day when you find someone who's selfless enough to give themselves up for the sake of someone else. So Pluto in Aquarius is really asking you to evaluate the qualities of the leaders. Type of leaders who are going to win are the ones who know how to share power instead of hoarding it. Aquarius represents the common man versus Leo is the star. So this back and forth, which by the way, Jupiter's in Leo, Pluto's in Aquarius, is very much this idea of individual versus collective needs. So being the person who is able to represent a group of people instead of their self-interest is a really great way to take advantage of this astrology. Who do you represent? This doesn't have to be a large scale thing. What's a cause that you believe in or that you're passionate about? Or similarly, in your work life, in your home life, etc., who's taking initiative, if anyone at all? And is there something that you're passionate about that you can take initiative on? And the other type of leader is the one who tears down what's rotting instead of enforcing it, bringing back that Pluto and Aquarius judgment card aspect of it all. Is about the dead coming back to life, re-inspiring our sense of purpose, and allowing ourselves new life in some kind of way. Trap is going to be getting so focused on how things should be that you lose track of reality. Aquarius oftentimes gets caught in theory, and we forget that no matter how we want the world to be, sometimes the world is a lot slower moving than we want it to. I can be progressive and push for change as much as I want, and I can also understand that there is slower work that has to be done in order for that work to be completed. So if I get so frustrated that the system that I created isn't working exactly the way that I think it should, but sometimes I trap myself from actually being able to deal with reality. So sometimes it's more about focusing on controlling the controllables with Pluto, and representing the common man is a great way to get ahead. Neptune, meanwhile, is asking, what belief is actually important enough to you that you'd be willing to fight for it? When do you turn belief into action? And when do you decide to actually move on something? Behind every single civil rights moment, there were people who were outrageous enough and disagreeable enough to actually stand for the changes. And Neptune in Aries is going to reward leaders who inspire and ignite passion and vision. Neptune asks us, what illusions are you ready to set down? How did you think things would go? And how is that no longer true? Maybe I'm seeing someone a specific type of way and they're not actually that person. I've just projected a fantasy onto them. Maybe I'm so focused on someone's potential that I forget to focus on what they're actually doing. So there's a lot of accountability that comes into play, I think, with Neptune and Aries. And then lastly, is your anger righteous or is it misdirected? Is it fuck the world because I can't stand what's going on right now? Or do you actually have something that is a burning passion that is righteous that you can take advantage of and utilize to fuel you? Is your anger inspiring you to move or is it inspiring you to shut down? And if it's inspiring you to shut down, then it's making you unable to impact change. So the type of leader who wins is, again, the one who ignites passion and inspires with a vision. So if you are a person who is going out and doing and creating the lane, there will be people who follow you. Neptune similarly sometimes creates hive mind culture or groupthink. So if Neptune is a dissolver and Aries represents identity, this dissolution of identity can create like a tribe mind, for example. That's where you get things like cults coming up, new religious movements coming up. You get these gurus and supreme leader type of personalities as well. But the other type of leader who's going to win is the one who leads people to their own divinity. So if you are inspiring people to recognize the divinity within themselves and inspire them to action instead of inspiring them to rely on something outside of themselves, that is a very positive manifestation of Neptune in Aries that can be utilized. Again, the trap, propping yourself up as a guru or a supreme leader instead of allowing individual identity to flourish. And last outer planet, Uranus in Gemini asks, where does the way you think, learn, or communicate need an update? How do we gotta change? I hate to tell you guys this, but change is coming. And I've seen it, for example, in my own husband. He looks around the neighborhood and he doesn't recognize a single shop. And it makes him frustrated and he says, oh, that place closed. I used to love that place. These sort of moments in history happen every so often. And the way that we stay ahead of it is by embracing the change instead of resenting it. Secondly, what tool or skill are you avoiding that would change how you operate? This does not have to be AI. It can be. I am of the strong opinion that as someone who can hold the environmental concerns in one hand, you better believe I am not going to tell a small business to not utilize AI. I am not going to tell an individual business that they shouldn't compete with corporations that already have mastery of AI. And I'm not going to tell them to not make their life easier. Right now is a period where some of these mom and pop shops might not have the traction, ability, or financial means to keep up with corporations that are adopting this technology. So, our ability to embrace it in some kind of way, or to at least understand it, in my personal opinion, is probably one of the better ways to utilize Uranus and Gemini. Also, whose information am I absorbing on autopilot and does it still serve me? Don't trust the news unless you want to. That's the easiest way that I could say it. There's going to be a ton of information hurled at us. Last time around, Uranus and Gemini, we have a rise in propaganda, especially in Russian propaganda as well as United States propaganda. Understanding what's propaganda and what's noise is a really big part of understanding Uranus and Gemini. So, the type of leaders who wins, if you're embracing new forms of communication and technology, I guarantee you there's a way to win. If you're quick to get information out, Gemini is the news reporter. So Gemini thrives by controlling the narrative. And similarly, the people who are able to get their opinion out there quickly are probably going to have a better chance at controlling the narrative rather than those who are late to adopt a new idea. And flexibility pays off tenfold whenever we are in Uranus and Gemini territory. So the trap is going to be treating every change as an assault on your way of life, as well as rigidity and getting left behind by a world that is actively changing. We covered a ton, and I just want you to remember it is one day at a time. Be adaptable. Don't panic about how the world is changing. Work within your sphere of influence. So if you are so focused on what's going on the other side of the globe that you're forgetting to support your neighbor who needs water, that is a bigger issue than a world issue. That's a you issue, my friend. Working within your sphere of influence and being able to impact what you can actually physically, tangibly change is the biggest part of it. So, how can I create a better family unit? How can I create a better neighborhood right now? How can I make my career as much of what I want it to be? And how do I build a better community? Be the magician, which, if you are the magician, you are the master of all your tools. You know what you're working with and you know how to handle it. And that's all I can hope for us to do in this coming July as we start to see some of these bigger cultural shifts take place. If there's any closing thoughts or questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. Other than that, guys, find me online, find me on Instagram. That's where I post the most. And also, don't forget, if you're interested in custom horoscopes based on your birth chart, the most relevant details to you, find my stand store in the bio. And yeah, thank you guys. I think I'm going to not talk for 3 days now. We'll see you guys next time.